is separation of church and state actually possible at all? I have to confess that when I started this series of audio recordings, my plan was to be very off-the-cuff and spontaneous, but I have long since lost count of how many times I've re-recorded this one. Each time I've forgotten something, rambled in the wrong direction, or else mucked up the audio quality. Anyway. Oh, and I also have to quickly thank one of the librarians at the Christchurch Central Library. Talking to her certainly helped me realise that I'd been smuggling a few assumptions into this discussion that not necessarily everyone is subscribed to. So, I basically have, I was going to say 3, but actually 4 points to cover. What is religion? How does it affect politics? What do we have now, and what else could there be? So, on the first point, I think that there's a case to be made that looking at religion as a specific organisation with a list of beliefs that you either agree to or disagree with. That's not necessarily the only way we can examine religion. Another perspective is to try our best to look at the human species from the outside as if we were biologists studying humans. And from that perspective, I would say that religion up there with digestion and respiration, something that the species does or it dies. Or, let me put it another way. It seems to be inevitable that, regardless of whether or not they believe in divine persons, human societies have at their centre the repetition of ceremonies that reinforce a set of axiomatic beliefs that aren't even necessarily verbal in nature. That by repeating the ceremonies, it sort of tunes psychology to be between the individual members of the society to be cohesive enough for them to cooperate. So, point 2, how does this relate to politics? And I would say that if you were to look at what the state is, which is customarily defined as a monopoly on armed force within a geographically defined area, that monopoly of force requires the requires those shared axiomatic, quite possibly non-verbal beliefs, so that everyone agrees on what authority is supposed to look like. So this is point 3, and this is the big one. What do we have now, if I'm correct about the state being a sort of shadow of the average member of society's religious mind? And I would say that the political turmoil that certainly the Western world, and especially the Anglophone countries, is presently experiencing is because we have a great many post-God religions that are contradictory to each other. Different members of society are signed up to them. And the real danger is that these post-God religions aren't named. So Or to put it another way, in order for the state to continue to exist, it must start without a church granting it the appearance of legitimacy. It must adopt functions of a church, not necessarily all of them, but certainly enough to get that agreement across society. And honestly, ask the average New Zealander what they would choose if they had to choose between, well, ask the average New Zealand Christian what they would choose if they had to choose between democracy and Christianity, and you kind of quickly find that you're calling their God into question, despite there not being anything about democracy in the Bible. So, point 4, what else could there be? I don't think the relationship I have outlined between church and state is necessarily symmetrical. Amish societies are a great success story of anarchy in the modern era. They're a remnant of what was called or what recent historians have taken to calling the Radical Reformation, who realised that feudalism assumed that everyone was in the same church, and by breaking away from the Catholics, they have also rejected the system of nobility. To the best of my knowledge, Amish people don't call themselves anarchist, but they certainly are in an extraordinarily conservative sense, and I actually rather admire them for that. They have got into a position where they're basically exempt from being US citizens and paying United States tax. From what I'm given to understand, they usually pay local tax, and even then it's a bit reluctant. They don't want anything from the government, and they don't want to give anything to the government. Yeah, and there's also medieval Ireland, which had a rather complicated political system that didn't precisely have a state to it. But anyway, if you're a person of philosophical inclination and you have come across this audio recording, I would be most interested to hear from you if you have either refuted any of my points or else found a way to expand upon them. And because I haven't thought of anything unique to this series of recordings to end them with, I'm going to say over and out.